Welcome to Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and tonight I am joined by Laura Bradburn. It is tonight, isn't it? I said tonight earlier on.
It's tonight now.
10 to 6. 10 to 6, we'll call it tonight. Loads to discuss. We are talking Celtic 4, Raith Rovers 0. We're into the next round of the Scottish Cup. Nice clean sheet. Good second half. Changed when Jota came on. We'll talk about everything in between because it wasn't as convincing in the first half. Laura, what did you make of the second half?
No, it wasn't as convincing in the first half. It certainly was in the second half. I think changes in personnel made a massive difference. And I don't want to start off on a negative, but I think if you're Mikey Johnston, you're looking at that going, I have no future at Celtic Park after that. The fact that even if no other change had been made, just swapping him for Jota was enough to make the massive difference in the game that it made. Jota came on, and don't get me wrong, not every Celtic player we're going to have is going to be of the level of Jota, but it just made it look so easy as it should have been from the start. And it had everything Johnston has, but with end product at the end of it as well.
Yeah, you like what you said there, starting off with a negative. The half-time show could have been quite a negative show because we weren't brilliant in the first half, Laura, let's be honest. We got the goal and then we started playing in a kind of sloppy fashion. We gave Raith Rovers a fair bit of credit at half-time because, they were very well organised and it was the banks of defenders and you see all that. And you think to yourself, well, at some point during that second half, our quality and our supreme fitness over our opponents is going to shine through and we're going to maybe get another couple of goals. So that was my expectation in the second half. But it all changed, like you said, when Jota came on. So that's twofold. You've got the absolute magician that is Jota, and there's comments coming in from the comments field from Discoland, for example. Welcome to the show, Discoland. Please buy Jota. I mean, he is... We ran a show the other day and I think it was, the icons that are being created by Ange Postecoglou, and people said, you can't be an icon after 5 minutes. But what you can see in some of these players is the potential to go on and be something special. And I mean, Jota's technique is unbelievable. There's a moment down the left-hand side where he's got absolutely no right to beat his first man, never mind his second man. And he still manages to get it and win the corner. Now, it could be argued that Mikey Johnston won a few corners in the first half. Yes, he did. But I think anyone watching that, and this is with Celtic's best interests at heart, Laura, anyone watching that game for 90 minutes, it's a clear indication that the drop-off in quality from our first-choice left winger to our second choice and Mikey, and let's not forget, to be 22-year-old and be Celtic's second-choice left winger is something to behold. But the drop in quality is massive. It's huge. It's astronomical. And like you said at half-time, you want young Celts coming through to make it. I would love for Mikey Johnston to make it at Celtic. And there's always these wee flashes. There were flashes in the League Cup final, Laura. There were flashes tonight at half-time made the point he's getting doubled up, which he is. But they double up on Jota and it doesn't really affect him. He just takes the two of them on. And I get that he is a special talent. But yeah, one of the points I wanted to talk about, and you brought it up, is not only the brilliance of Jota, but where does this leave Mikey? I mean, he's been so unlucky with injury. And the move that obviously he's pulled up a muscle was a good move. He done so well to get the ball in. The ball obviously ended up ricocheting off the bar. But it's almost as if you're just expecting the next injury from Mikey Johnston, which is a shame. I made the point probably earlier on this season, Laura, that he reminds me a lot, and I don't mean he's any better or worse than, but just the build of the player. He reminds me a lot of Lewis Morgan. And Lewis Morgan went over to Inter Miami, where he's absolutely lauded as a player. I think he won their version of the player of the season last year, most valuable player. Different style of game, perhaps more space, maybe not as fast and furious as a Scottish game, and he's absolutely flying. And I just think that Mikey Johnston's got a lot of talent. There's no doubt in it, but I just don't know how many times we're going to have this discussion, Laura, before it gets to the point where we think, yeah, maybe his future lies elsewhere.
I think the thing is, if if Jota comes on in that second half and doesn't make the difference that he made, you could have argued that Mikey Johnston had a fairly decent first half. I said at half-time he's actually the most threat that we appeared to have in the first half. But obviously Andrew's looked at him and gone, there's no end product there. I know if I bring Jota on, there will be end product. And that proved to be exactly the case. You know, when you look at our teams, we talked about it before the match, about how Ralston has changed from a player that you used to be concerned seeing on the starting lineup, and now you're not concerned. To take it a step further, we have players who can absolutely be relied on to put in a good performance. You're talking about Joe Hart, Carter Vickers, Callum McGregor, Furuhashi when he's fit, to name but a few. Mikey Johnston is not just a player who has zero impact in a game. Sometimes you feel he's actually having a negative impact in the game. And looking back at that first half, you feel he saw so much of the ball that actually, when you look back at it and compare what Jota did in the second half to what he did in the first half, he was the point at which everything started and stopped, whereas Jota made those chances for other people. He laid the ball on for the Giakoumakis goal. He took players on left, right and centre and was making vital passes. I take no pleasure, like you said, in talking down any Celtic youngster or suggesting that a Celtic youngster has no future at the club. But as for Mikey Johnston, there are other players who have had less chances than him. And I feel he's had enough now to prove what he's about. And with all due respect to Raith Rovers, if you come out of a game thinking Mikey Johnston didn't do it against Raith Rovers, what kind of a level does that suggest that he'll be able to play at? Certainly not one that Celtic would be aiming for, I wouldn't suggest.
No, and sometimes, Laura, it's just the change that a player needs, and perhaps he can play at a similar level just somewhere else. And there was talk in January there about a proposed move to Aberdeen breaking down, and they've eventually come in and taken Adam Montgomery instead. But you hear Celtic players within the squad talking about the talent of Mikey Johnston. But really, you've got to ask yourself, yes, all these injuries would have affected any player. And there was that infamous moment where he's wanted to prove to the gaffer he can keep playing. He stays on. He gets injured, and obviously Neil Lennon was not happy. He was out for a long time after that. But yeah, we'll try and verge on the positives as well, because there were some. I mean, one player gets out injured and another one arrives in Jullien. We'll talk about him. I'm not finished with Jota yet, though, because that was a special performance. It was like a cameo. He comes in, gets the man of the match, as Chancellor says, and he does turn the game round. Brian Degnan said that. It was a good result, poor performance until Jota arrived on the scene. How are we feeling? Well, it kind of washes away a lot of the first half frustrations. I mean, I had given my predicted team on the Thursday, and from that prediction, there were 5 starters, which were Joe Hart, Cameron Carter-Vickers, Rio Hatate, Tommy Rogic and Giakoumakis. So when I'm looking at that, I'm thinking, well, there's 6 what I would consider second choices for their respective positions coming in the first half. Is it any wonder that's going to be a disjointed team? Because that's a team that hasn't really played together. There's no synergy, Laura, and it's a bit stop-start in that first half. But we should maybe expect it, because there's 6 players coming in, some of them out of the cold, and they're all getting asked to play. One of the biggest plus points in recent times has been how free-flowing it's been. And that's because there's the chemistry, there's a dynamic between certain players and certain partnerships. You break that down a wee bit when you bring 6 players in, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I had a brief moment, and I know we'll get on to him in due course, but I had a brief moment just realising to myself when Jullien came on, I actually thought to myself, how many of the players on the pitch has he played with for Celtic before?
Yeah.
Like at the point that he came on, I mean, so you're talking about, I think Rogic had already gone off, so it was perhaps Ralston, Beaton and maybe Welsh. I don't know if he ever played with Welsh or if that was slightly too early, but so that alone, the reason I raise that as a point is it just shows you the influx and the changeover of players we've had in such a short period of time, that a player who hasn't played since December 2020 can come in to a squad where he's probably played with, single figures of the other players in the squad, numbers-wise. So, yeah, that kind of change, and especially chopping and changing it up today, like you said, with the 6 changes, does make for destabilisation. But what we are aiming for and what we've been crying out for, and what I think this squad is starting to show, is if Ange manages to imprint what he wants to do on the squad as a whole, the way that we know he wants to do it, the personnel almost becomes slightly, I don't want to say irrelevant, but completely interchangeable with each other. You can take one out, you can slot one in. We talked before about not wanting the standard to drop off massively when you make those changes. What this squad is showing is that for the majority, a few aside, you can take, Hatate out and put Ideguchi in. You can take Rogic out and put O'Reilly in. You can take Beaton out and put McGregor in. And the standard won't drop. And that's exactly what we're looking for. So then you can go, well, yeah, there has been 6 changes in the squad today, but the 6 players that have come in and replaced the other 6 are as good, if not better. And so, we'll continue to operate at the level that we have been. And it's just really encouraging to see.
Yeah, when I'm looking at it, I think it's a good point, because looking at some of the guys that have come in, Ralston comes in for Juranovic. You can trust Ralston. I think Welsh comes in and he played as well as you would expect. There was no real drop-off. There was a couple of moments between him and Hart, and I'm not sure what was going on there. But in terms of the overall performance, Welsh played pretty well. Scales obviously opened the scoring, played reasonably well. I mean, Beaton coming in, he's a different type of player, but he done his job well. And I think it is Forrest and Johnston that are the 2 concerns out of the ones that came in there, Laura. But you mentioned as well about Jullien. If we were just to focus on the back 5, well, it's the first time he's played with Hart. Ralston, he wouldn't have played many games with Ralston in the team. He wouldn't have played many games with Welsh in the side. And he's certainly not played with Scales. So he's walked into, the unknown there. And I'm pretty sure that he'll give him more game time. It will get to that point where if Starfield drops out and Jullien comes in, you're confident he's going to just slot right in there, And it was great to see the big man coming on, because it's been a long, hard journey for him. There's been a few setbacks, I'm sure, because I don't think anyone expected it to be 14 months out. People are asking, is he ever going to come back? When he comes back, what version of Jullien are we going to get? So, yeah, he's been eased in tonight. And I think there's a good point here on Twitch. See, we do bring up Twitch comments. Ian Mack, 65, thanks for getting involved, pal. What did I say? No doubt in my mind that if Maeda, Jota and Abada were on, we'd be 3 or 4 up. There is a complete difference in quality. Certainly, Jota and Abada, we could have that discussion around Maeda and Giakoumakis as well at some point tonight. But Jota and Abada comes on for Mikey and James Forrest, and they step up in standard, intensity. I just think that what was lacking with James Forrest tonight, Laura, was almost like a directness. He's getting the play, he's in a good position, and he's coming inside. There was no really, for me, any danger from James Forrest. And even when it seemed to open up for him, and he's going to take a shot, but there's a player there, so he takes another sidestep, and there's another player in front of him. And I think he'd done it 3 or 4 times. He almost ran into his own player. What's your concerns with James Forrest? If we've spoken about Mikey Johnston on the left, what's your concerns with James? Because there comes a point where you think, right, he's had enough game time now. He should be contributing better than he has been. He wasn't great tonight.
Well, listen, we've talked a lot about the concerns we had about Jullien coming back and having a massive injury and wondering if we'd ever see the same player again. I don't think enough people have voiced those concerns about James Forrest. People forget how much of last season he missed, I think, and the size of the injury he was coming back from. And for a player who relied so much of his career on pace, time waits for no man. He's 30 years old now. He's come back from a serious injury. He has previously relied on pace. It looks to me like he knows that he can't rely on that anymore. Now, I might be speaking way out of turn here. Maybe he can. Maybe that was just the way he chose to play today. But at that point you're making about him continuing to cut inside and run into players, I think that's because the way that he's played over the years to me has always been that he's been a player who can knock it past somebody and run. Mm-hmm. And I've not seen him do that very often, if at all, since he came back from this injury. My concern is that potentially he has lost that from his game. And without that, I wonder what he brings, because it was a major part of his game. Now, I'm not saying he's not a good footballer in other senses, but it's the same as with any player. If you have to fundamentally, if a golfer has to fundamentally change their swing, if a tennis player has to fundamentally change the way they use a racket, doesn't make them a bad golfer, a bad tennis player, a bad footballer. But they're certainly going to take a long time to adapt, even over and above coming over that injury. And my concern is that James Forrest has had to make such a massive change to the way that he plays his game that it might take him a long time to get used to that and to be as effective as he was before, if he ever does become as effective as he was before.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, Laura, let's remember 30 is young for some people on this broadcast. But I go back to an interview that I remember Michael Owen giving, and I'm not comparing the players, very, very different type of players in a different position, Forrest and Owen. But a lot of their game was based on that bursty pace, wasn't it? I mean, when Owen came on the scene at Liverpool, you thought anything was achievable for him. He had this bursty pace that, you know, it just gave him that yard extra, put him into positions where things opened up for him. And we've seen a lot of that for Jamesy over the years, where, like you say, that wee step over, he's in. Whereas tonight, he tried it 3 or 4 times and he's just getting further and further away from the goal. And when you lose that, and Owen spoke about how he lost that and basically had to completely reinvent himself as a footballer. And when you look at the Michael Owen in the last, let's say, 8 years of his career compared to his first 8, they're 2 different players. And the one in the latter half of that career was a much lesser quality player. So although Forrest is 30, and I would expect him to play up until he's 35, 36 years of age, normally, there is that slight niggling concern now that wee yardie pace is away. The sharpness is gone. And I don't want to write him off. I mean, when you look at his experience, the games that he's played more games than anybody else in the Celtic squad by quite a distance. And, 435 games he's now played for Celtic, 96 goals, 96 assists. And you look at the silverware that he's won, he's in his testimonial, he's in that kind of area. He's played for 13 seasons. You know, he's been due testimonial for a wee while now. And, I think we'll always look back on him over that quadruple treble period, Laura, as an absolute, I don't know, people say icon, great, legend. I don't know the definition between these terms, but he's up there. He's always going to be fondly remembered as someone who achieved so much in a Celtic jersey. I don't want to write him off. I think it's so important to have 3 or 4, a core, who have come through the Celtic ranks and are part of that, Celtic heritage. And we've got that in this squad, and I think it's very important. But yeah, there are some concerns creeping in about Jamesy now, because tonight was one of the nights, like you said about Mikey Johnston. There you go and do it, because we expect you to be able to do it on a night like tonight. And I keep saying it's a night time. It was actually a 4 o'clock kickoff. The slackness, I would agree. I would put that down to the personnel not really having the dynamic nature, because they've not really played alongside each other. But there's a few other players that deserve comment. And one of them is indeed Giakoumakis. Before I go on, Johnson should be loaned out. I think we tried to do that. David Bailey comes in. It's a good point on Facebook. But I think we did try to do that in January, didn't we? And I don't know what the breakdown was there. I think it would have benefited him. We've seen how it benefited Ryan Christie, Chris Ayer, Callum McGregor. Giakoumakis, he was disappointed when he came off. He got his goal, Laura. He does what Giakoumakis does. He wins a lot of free kicks. He puts himself about. He doesn't give defenders an inch. He's a very hard-working striker. But the one thing I was a wee bit concerned about was the goals weren't coming, and it was an inspired performance by the Motherwell goalie or the Dundee United goalie or the Rangers goalie, because he had 5 chances in those 3 games, didn't get a goal. He got his goal tonight. What did you make of his overall performance?
I thought the word nuisance springs to mind, and I think that is the way in which he plays his game an awful lot. And I think there's an effectiveness to that and a role for that in the team that he certainly he does play well. I think, like Alan Robertson says there in the comments, GG deserved that. I think he did deserve it. I think you could see in his reaction that he's desperate for goals and that he's frustrated that he's not getting those goals. So I think he did fantastic to be in the position that he was in, because let's not forget, for that goal, he's got to keep up pace with Jota. He's got to be in line with where Jota's at. Everybody says, oh yeah, Jota rolls the ball across, and all he's got to do is tap it in. He's got to be in the position to tap it in, and part of being a striker is doing that as well. So I think he did more than enough. And I think that's the other thing as well, is this is where you get into a danger of comparing strikers in terms of goals. You could say, some people could come on here and say, well, his goal scoring record is no better than Ajetti's was in the same number of games that he's played for Celtic, because if we all remember, Ajeti scored a barrel load of goals. The problem with Ajeti in comparison to Giakoumakis is, and I know strikers are meant to score goals and that's what they're there to do, but if you're Ajeti, it seems all he contributes is goals. If he's not scoring goals, he's contributing nothing to the team. The least you can say about Giakoumakis is, if he doesn't go on the score sheet, he's certainly contributed to the goals that have been scored by making himself something for the defenders to get concerned about, to give space to the likes of Rogic, O'Reilly, Hatate, Jota, whoever you want to name coming up from the midfield. So, yeah, would I like to see more goals from him? I think I probably would, because I think he wants to score more goals as well. But I think also that he is still providing something to the squad that another player with the same number of goals might not be, and therefore I think he should be looked at in a slightly more positive light than other players with an equal number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ajeti. You're pulling that name out of the bag as well, Laura. But going back to the point you made about Jullien coming in and being someone who, 1 week you might get Cameron Carter-Vickers and Starfelt, the next week you might get CCV and Jullien. I think similarly with Giakoumakis and Maeda, whereby there is no clear fire first choice between the two. I don't think, from what I've seen. Obviously, Maeda comes in and scores a goal as well. I don't think there's a surefire first choice. I think, Ange is going to look at the opposition and he's going to look at which player suits the opposition better until Kyogo comes in, and he's by far and away the first choice centre forward. But yes, I think Giakoumakis done himself absolutely no harm tonight. He was disappointed when he came off, and of course what then happens is his replacement comes out and scores. And it was a really well worked goal. I know that it was a second attempt, good save by the goalie, but it was a really well worked goal where we have actually scored from a corner. I know it was a secondary header, but Abada flights it in. Ralston with a header. Important header by Ralston.
Oh, do you know something? Having been on with Alan Morrison, he would tell you that's your confirmation bias showing that we scored from a corner. That's what he would say.
We don't do it very often, though, do we? To the point where when O'Reilly came in, I was thinking, wow, we've got another guy that can fly at a corner. And I just think it's one of the ones, and again, Jullien's name gets thrown into the mix when we're talking corners. We've been very ineffective in terms of goals from corners. I know that there's going to be probably a train of thought that says, you retain possession by winning a corner, which seems alien to me. It does at the moment seem alien to me. And then you just get the corner back into play and keep the possession to try and craft open an opportunity. But we scored, not directly, but we scored from a corner tonight, which is tremendous. And we've gone on to get a fourth. And that brings me on to Funkman05. Great name. I am really confused. The guy who was booked for the stamp on Maeda was also the same guy who handled the ball. Right? Correct. And somebody else got booked for the second issue. Now, we mentioned at halftime we weren't big fans of this referee. And there's been previous, etc. But tonight, you look at that, which was just absolute nonsense watching that. Now and again referees are going to make a wrong call, but that there, booking the wrong player when the guy who was actually responsible for the handball would have got a second booking and a sending off. And then even if you want to throw into the mix Raith Rovers penalty shout in the first half to try and balance it up, it's the poor standard, Laura, isn't it? That's the frustration here. Before we go into anything else, and I know that Alan's writing a very detailed blog on Celtic by Numbers, looking at big decisions that aren't going Celtic's way. And he's doing it very well and in a very balanced way. But I think when you watch tonight's game, the standard is very poor for both teams.
Yeah. I think, I said this to you before we came on air. It's important, I think, to point out situations like this, because so often you can think that the refereeing performance is poor and then you only cite the instances in which it's against your team. And we've seen plenty against Celtic this season. In this instance, what I saw was, and yes, we'll go into the second decision, but, Raith Rovers could be sitting there suggesting they should have had a penalty when they were 1-0 down, and maybe that would have changed the game. They could have come back to 1 each, and maybe that would have made a difference. But for anybody watching who's confused, so basically what happened was, obviously, Sean Mackey, the loanee Hibs player, was booked for a tackle on Maeda out on the touchline. He was then the player who handballed the ball for the penalty that Beaton took. Wasn't the only one that tried to handball it, mind you. Masonda for Raith Rovers tried to handball it as well. But anyway, he handballed it. There was confusion because the referee then flashed the yellow card, but it wasn't clear who he flashed it at. And then it came out via the fourth official that the player who'd received the booking for the yellow card was Ryan Matthews, but that he received the booking for the handball, not for anything else. So confusion reigns. But the reason that it is worth highlighting is because it just shows you, like you say, this is not about conspiracy theories. This is not about saying that there's somebody at the SFA who's phoning referees and saying, give Rangers all the decisions, don't give Celtic any of the decisions. This is about just seeing a situation that would rarely, if ever, happen in any other league in the world, where there's a referee who doesn't even appear to know which player's which, who's handballed it, who's not, who he's booked, who he's not. What I can't even get out of my head, and this is me just speculating here, but I can't get out of my head, the fact that did he book the wrong player thinking that that was the player who handballed it, or did he realise that he had booked Mackey twice and not sent him off, so he changed who he had booked because it was such a random flailing of the card? Do you know what I mean? I can't even tell really what I believe, or whether it's just he said to the fourth official, tell them it was Matthews, tell them I thought Matthews did the handball. So it's just shocking all round, and it's the type of thing that, we talked on Friday on the Bulletin about how the Celtic Rangers match the other night was the biggest match in European football, and how all eyes were on it. Mm-hmm. Had all eyes been on it and a decision like that one had been made today, the Scottish League, the Scottish Cup, the Scottish football system would have been laughed at, because it just looked utterly amateurish and shambolic. And I thought there was plenty of problems with the referee tonight, and that just encapsulated it all in one. It just looked like a confused mess. Yeah,
it did. It did. And by the way, if it was the latter, Laura, and he's thought, oh no, I booked him twice, let's just pretend it was Matthews that I booked, that would not surprise me. That kind of thing doesn't surprise me in Scottish football. We're looking ahead. We've got a couple of fixtures at Celtic Park coming up. We have Bodo Glimt, followed by Dundee. It's a Thursday, Sunday. And we've got to ask the question, that was something of a change lineup tonight. What do we do on Thursday? Sean F comes in on YouTube. And by the way, if you are watching on YouTube, please make sure you subscribe. We're only about 15 or a dozen away from our next milestone. So make sure you subscribe. We've got some huge plans coming up for content. And if you subscribe and hit the notifications bell, you will not miss it, as well as your 12:30 daily bulletins, your Matchday bulletins, etc. So Sean F comes in to say, I think Maeda is playing next week through the middle with Abada and Jota on the wings. Well, for sure, Abada and Jota start for me in the European game. Laura, what do you do with the centre forward, and does Jullien's appearance tonight make any difference to the defensive prediction that you're going to make? And of course, Ideguchi, we've not really spoken about Ideguchi. He came in, he was tidy, he played pretty well. How do we shape up in the midfield? What are you looking for on Thursday night in terms of the team selection?
I think in terms of team selection, assuming assuming injuries don't play a part in any of the changes that were made tonight, or this afternoon, I should say, I think Starfelt will probably be back in to partner Carter Vickers. Whether Juranovic is match fit or not remains to be seen, but I would expect Ralston to come back in. I would like to see Scales at left back again, because I thought he did enough to merit a start on Thursday, and Joe Hart in goal. That kind of makes the decision for itself. The big changes I would like to see made on Thursday is that I think we can't go into Thursday's game without McGregor being back in the middle of the park. Again, I don't know what the situation is with O'Reilly and why he was kept out, but assuming he's fit, I would want him back in. And to steal an idea from Tony Haggerty, I would like to see him partnered up with Rogic, because I don't think we've seen that yet. I think that would be interesting. Perhaps give Hatate a little bit of a rest, because I think a lot of people, after his performance against Aberdeen, kind of wanted him back in tonight to see if he could kind of rectify that. But I think what I'm coming to the conclusion of after seeing him today is he was very effective. He made a couple of really good passes, especially the one to Jota before he put the ball in for Giakoumakis for the goal. But I think he looks like he's a bit leggy and probably needs a little bit of a rest. And then as far as for up front goes, based on the second half performance, it's got to be Jota, Maeda and Abada for me up front. No questions.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. And another thing, Jullien comes back in. I know that we lost Mikey Johnston. Who knows how serious that is? But Jullien comes in. That gives you a lift. We've still got Kyogo to come back, and we've still got David Turnbull to come back, Laura. So, these are things we don't know the timescales, particularly for Kyogo. But these are the things that, again, are just going to bolster the squad and bolster the team and the morale. And we're still winning games. Yeah, we went out there tonight. We won 4-0, another clean sheet. We're into the next round of the Scottish. The quadruple is still on. A few points coming in after your comments about the refereeing decision. Stephen Gallagher, confusion reigns in almost every game by the officials. Brian Murphy, the standard of refereeing in Scotland is appalling. We've got Peter Caloyero, referee, Shada Graham Paul in 2006 World Cup, where he booked the same player 3 times. Martin Jock Johnson, the refs are embarrassing, make the SPFL look so bad. I think we've got a thread going on here, and Sean McGee's standard of refereeing in this country is an utter disgrace for all teams. So we're not happy with the refereeing. We've called it out, even though we've won fairly comfortably in the end. Jota was absolutely untouchable this evening. He comes on and wins the man of the match. Mikey Johnston is possibly injured, and we get Chris Jullien back. So all in all, a good day at the office, Laura. Thanks everybody for getting involved. 1,200 strong on a live stream after a Raith Rovers Scottish Cup victory. If you haven't subscribed on YouTube, make sure you do that, and you won't be missing some of the big content coming your way. Laura Bradburn, thanks for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.